Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to another wonderful tasting with the Virtual Tasting Society. Today, we're excited to welcome back Jack Choate of Heaven Hill. He did a tasting with us. Gosh, it's been way too long, a year and a half now. But we're happy to have you back. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a really fun lineup today. We have some classics from Heaven Hill, as well as their new award-winning lineup from the Grain of Glass. So we're excited to have Jack here to tell us all about the brand. Fill us in on what's happening lately, anything new we should be excited for besides what we're already tasting, and then also taste us through these expressions and tell us all about them. All that said, thank you all for being here. I'm not sure if we have any new faces, familiar faces. Well, familiar faces for sure. Anybody who's new here for the first time, welcome. We're all here to ask questions and participate. That's kind of what we're all about. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. But if you're not talking, keep yourself on mute. Just we don't want to have background noise and whatnot. Other than that, feel free to use the chat. That's what we're all very happy to do that. And when we do get to the polls, answer those as well. Enjoy, and over to Jack.
Thanks, Vadim. How's everyone tonight?
Great.
Um, my name is Jack Choate. I am one of the two whiskey ambassadors at Heaven Hill Distillery, based in the U.S. We actually have a third now based in London, and we're expanding internationally, which is very cool for us. We're almost 90 years in business. Our business has been so entirely focused on the U.S. and if you want to talk about, as what Vadim alluded to, if you want to talk about what's new from Heaven Hill, the international market for us is so exciting, because we really have barely tapped the surface there. For what's new from us, global expansion is a big thing for us. From a production standpoint, we're less than a month away from opening a brand new distillery. For those of you that are unaware, we started distilling in Bardstown, Kentucky in 1935 and distilled only there until 1996. November 7th, 1996, that distillery actually burned to the ground, with a horrific fire. And for about 3 years, 3 to 4 years, we were without a home until we started distilling at Bernheim, which was a distillery that we acquired from United Distillers, out of London. So we've been doing the majority of our production there for the last 25 years, and we broke ground summer of 22, to bring distilling for Heaven Hill back to Bardstown. So Heaven Hill Springs Distillery will barrel its first barrel in January of 2025, which we are really, really, really excited about. And in talking to our master distiller, our seventh master distiller, Connor O'Driscoll, this has been a dream project for him. He started in the distilling industry in 2004. He was actually hired to run the overnight shift at Brown-Forman, which is right across the street, from the Bernheim facility. And the overnight distillation run at Brown-Forman was actually Heaven Hill Distillate. That's where we ran our rye whiskey distillate, so all of our Pikesville and Rittenhouse, as well as our corn whiskey, so primarily mellow corn, and a little bit of Georgia Moon, our unaged corn whiskey at that time. Fast forward 15 years later, he gets hired to be the master distiller at Heaven Hill. And then about a year later, the Shapira family came to him and said, "Hey, we're going to bring distilling back to Bardstown, and you get to design it from ground up." So really a dream job for him. He's very excited. We're making 1,500 barrels a day of whiskey at Bernheim, and Heaven Hill Springs will have the ability to match that. We're starting at about a third of the capacity, but the design and the build out we've left the spaces open. Imagine the last time you built, a fortress with Legos, right? You sort of build over here, and then you leave this area, but you make the foundation, in case we need to get it bigger and get it up to production. There's a lot of media and conversation and chatter out there that tequila is the number one. People in the industry are nervous. You see people pulling back on production in bourbon. I'm fairly bullish on the market overall. The way that I look at it is that you go back 50, 70 years ago when our parents, and depending on your age, our grandparents stopped drinking bourbon, right? And around 1959 through the 60s was really when the downturn began, and then it got pretty deep in the 70s and 80s. We're never going back to that. The market's sort of righting itself. I think consumers are getting more educated on tequila now, whereas they were getting more educated on bourbon 5, 10, 15, starting 15 years ago, right? And I think we'll see all of this start to even out. You got to remember, we're still coming out of a crazy, 2 to 3 years of the pandemic, even in 2024, right? A lot of people want to say it's behind us, but it's not, especially from an economic standpoint and the way that we as consumers are interacting with not only spirits but all sorts of brands, right? And there's all sorts of stuff out there to sort of grab our attention, right? It's like nobody, I remember when I was in high school in the 90s and I was like the one person in my state with ADD, and it was like this crazy thing, right? And now everybody's got ADD because of social media, and you want to go find whatever the new crazy thing. And that's sort of how I relate to what's going on with spirits. But we're excited about the launch of the new distillery. That what comes out of that distillery will be different than what comes out of Bernheim. The conversations around Heaven Hill now amongst the aficionado circuits are, let me try this, whatever I can get my hands on pre-fire, right? Well, it's not like the fire affected the flavor. It's the terroir or the provenance of the whiskey that came out of Old Heaven Hill Springs, right? Which is different from the terroir or the provenance of the flavor profile of the distillate that comes out of Bernheim, which is going to be different from the terroir or the provenance that comes out of Heaven Hill Springs, New Heaven Hill Springs, right? Quote unquote new. That will not be part of the name. But we have so many different learnings, especially with Connor in charge of the wheels over the course of the last 5 years, and his very strict attention to detail. The way that we have evolved as a distillery, from how we're distilling, becoming more efficient, how Denny before Connor was able to get us from 500 barrels a day to 800 to 1200. Now Connor has it at 1500. And then what we've been able to do from a keeping track of barrels, building new warehouses, developing flavor profiles out of those new warehouses, innovation. It's really an exciting time for us. And I still see it as a very exciting time for the American whiskey industry overall. In Vadim's intro, he sort of said, we've got some new stuff, some old stuff, some award-winning stuff. Everything that we're tasting tonight is actually award-winning, right? We are tasting the Heaven Hill Grain to Glass. One of those just won one of Whiskey Advocate's top 10 whiskeys of the year. Along with it, we're tasting Larceny Barrel Proof, which was a Whiskey Advocate Whiskey of the Year. Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, which was a Whiskey Advocate Whiskey of the Year. And then Pikesville Rye, which was given the award for the Best American Rye by Jim Murray for its first 3 or 4 years of existence before I think Jim got canceled a little bit. But the idea behind the tasting is exactly sort of everything that I've touched on, right? The history, the heritage, and innovation, right? I think the main focal point for this tasting tonight, and when Vadim and I were going back and forth over emails, asking me what we were going to taste, the Heaven Hill Grain to Glass has been something that we've been very excited about at Heaven Hill, really since Max Shapiro told us about his idea back in 2016, 2017, right? Right in really the dawn of the main part of the bourbon boom innovation right now, especially if you're looking at it from an insider perspective, right? There was definitely a groundswell of discussion, but when you look at where we are now, if you look at the overall universe of bourbon fans, bourbon aficionados, 2015, 2016 was really sort of when the swell got probably as big as it's been, right? I mean, there's certain keywords that I can hear from liquor store owners, whiskey groups, etc., and I'm like, I bet you got interested in Heaven Hill in about 2015 or 2016, and I bet the bottle was Elijah Craig barrel proof. I bet or a Henry McKenna 10-year if you could get your hands on it. And generally speaking, they were like, "Man, how'd you know that?" I'm like, I don't know. Um, so this idea came from Max Shapira, our chairman. His father and uncles founded the company in 1935 with Harry and Joe Beam. And I think Max, similar to me and my colleagues within Heaven Hill, had gotten a little frustrated at hearing people talk about craft and innovation, right? And talking about it in very micro terms, very localized terms, right? Your craft because you're the distillery that was built in the foothills, 50 miles outside of Denver, right? Your craft because you were the distillery that was built on a plot of land, to the, southeast of a Pinot Noir field or vineyard in Sonoma, or something like that, right? And what we used to say and what we still say is what we've been doing since 1935 is craft, right? We've been working with what the Beam family has been doing for 2 to 3 centuries, right? When Harry and Joe Beam brought the know-how of whiskey making to the Shapira family and they created Old Heaven Hill Springs Distillery, there was nothing about that that wasn't craft, right? And we followed that same motto once it became Earl Beam and Parker Beam and Craig Beam and then Denny and now Connor, using the family yeast strain, using the same ideals, getting close to $1 million worth of grain a day delivered to our distillery becomes macro, but it's still craft, right? We're still working with family owned farms and operations within, primarily when you're talking about the corn and the wheat that we use, within no more than 70 to 80 miles from Burnham. So, yeah, that's west to Indiana and into Kentucky, but still very close proximity to what we're doing. Still very craft, still very hands-on, right? Even though we're getting 27 18-wheelers of grain a day delivered, we're still taking samples of that truck, this front, back, top, down, center. We're putting it in literally the same Mr. Coffee grinder. You don't know this, but my kitchen's that way. The same Mr. Coffee grinder that I grind coffee beans in my kitchen every morning, we're grinding the grains and tasting them to make sure that they are the proper flavor profile, right? To make sure that nothing is off about that grain, even after our probes have tested it, right? It's very hands-on. So to not continue with my sermon about that, Max was like, you know what? Let's do something craft, right? He started to ask around. He started talking to the families that we've had relationships for decades. He'd been staring at this field outside of his office in Bardstown that was empty for I don't know how long. I remember the first time I went to Bardstown in August of 2014, and I was like, "So we grow corn in that field that we distill, right?" And Max's son, who was showing me around, so Max said, asked whoever owned the field, "Can we use that field? We'll happily pay you." Sure, no problem. So we decided to get with the Peterson Farms, the farming company that we've been working with, that we have had a long-standing relationship with, Beck Seed Company that has been supplying grain seeds to all of our farming partners for years and decades. And we got with them, everyone came together in Bardstown and we said, hey, we want to do a project where we are growing the grain, we're distilling that grain, and then we're bottling that grain, and it's all a local product, grain to glass, right? So we found, with the help of Beck Seed Company, which is a world-renowned family-owned company that's supplying not only the distilling industry but all industries and agricultural fields. We found they found their proprietary varietal 6158 Show of hands, who's had any of the Grey glasses so far? Cool. It is a limited release, um, but it is something that will be released 3 times throughout the year. And we will continue to do that, the same release 3 times a year, for the foreseeable future, changing various parts about it. So if you haven't been able to get access through the first release in the summer or the second release that's hitting around now, third release will be shipping in probably January. And our goal, as with everything that we do for the most part, the limited stuff that comes out throughout the year, try to get more and more and more and more. And what you see when some of these products first come out is retailers will hold them back, bars will hold them back because in this day and age that we live in, everybody's used to, well, if I'm getting this shipment right now, it's all I'm getting right now, as we've seen with products similar to like Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond that has grown exponentially in our availability, based on our increase in production. Hopefully, everyone will be able to see this in the wild fairly soon. But so we worked with Beck's Seed Company. They found this varietal 6158, and they chose it because they deemed, and their team deemed, that at the basic exact latitude and longitude of where that field was across the street from our distillery. If you've been back to to Heaven Hill in Bardstown, it's the field just trying to do my directions real quick, just northwest of the first Rick House, right before you get to our visitor experience. It was going to grow very well there, as well as generally in Nelson County, right there in Bardstown. So working together with them, and then Peterson Farms, who's a family-owned farming company. They've been farming in America for over 13 generations. To give you some idea how far back that is, they were farming New York when it was called New Amsterdam. They have a lot of history in farming in this country. So they planted the seed, grew the seed, cultivated it, harvested it, and then delivered it to Bernheim. That was all in 2017. This product was distilled in the winter and early January of December 17 and January of 2018. And then it has been aging in our rick houses for the better part of 6 years plus, right? That's why we released in June of this past year, because we wanted to make sure all of that distillate could reach a minimum of 6 years old. So the idea behind the Heaven Hill grain to glass, and we're going to get to tasting here in a second, is let's concentrate on those three primary distillates that we make at Heaven Hill: a traditional bourbon, a wheated bourbon, and a rye whiskey. And then let's go a little nuts with them. Let's get back to the roots. Let's be a little bit more creative, innovative, craft in the new 21st century version of that word. And we created three totally different mash bills from what we've been doing over the course of, in the case of the traditional bourbon, almost 90 years. In the case of rye whiskey, 43-ish years. And then in the case of wheated bourbon, almost 25 years, right? So we have two bourbons at 52% corn, 35% rye and wheat, and 13% malted barley. And then let's do a high rye, or as they say in Bardstown, high rye, 63%, 24% corn, and 13% malted barley. I've never had a hard time talking about mash bills until these three, so I have to always pick up the bottle and make sure, because they are so different from what we've done at Heaven Hill and that I've been talking about at Heaven Hill for 10 years. So the really cool thing and interesting thing about this tasting is I think two people raised their hands when I said who has tried these before. I don't like to talk about which one I like better. I don't like to talk about tasting notes. Yeah, so we're going to be doing the rough order tonight is the wheated bourbon grain to glass, um, the traditional bourbon, then the high rye third, and then as you taste through these, add in the other three on top of those, which are more of the traditional Heaven Hill mash bills, to give you some idea, a little bit of a difference between the heritage versus the innovation, right? So, for those of you that have joined me at a tasting here with the Virtual Tasting Society, I don't give a lot of tasting notes, right? Because none of us have been together today. What I've tasted today is going to influence the way that I taste them. I've tasted these three whiskeys probably 15 times over the course of the last 6 months with various groups. And even myself tasting them the first time back in May when I got sent samples to June when I went to our launch event, and then through the previous or the following 4 or 5 months, the nuances and the flavor profiles that I get out of them are strikingly different. And the feedback that I get from folks is literally different from person to person. Yes, I think there's a couple of standouts, a couple of commonalities between the flavor profiles, but I'll let y'all go ahead and taste them by yourself. And if anyone has any questions while folks are tasting, I'll be happy to answer those, and then we can talk a little bit more about the other three whiskeys and other things going on at Heaven Hill. Has anyone been back to Heaven Hill this fall? Me neither.
On next week.
Going next week.
Yes,
Nice. Where are you traveling from?
LA.
Oh, nice. Are you
We're driving
going?
across country and
Oh,
stopping in Louisville for a couple stops.
oh, good for you. Nice. I did the holiday cross country trek during the pandemic, and it was wonderful. I stopped in Louisville on the way back.
I just Googled it, and the Heaven Hill experience where we went, Google shows that it's permanently closed. Is that a new thing?
Uh, that is definitely not correct.
Okay.
It may we changed the name from the Heaven Hill Bourbon Heritage Center to the Heaven Hill Bourbon Experience. So maybe that could be an old posting, but it is definitely not. Is definitely not. Oops, sorry.
Gilkey Road, right?
Yes, Gilkey Road. Yep.
Okay, that's where we went 2 years ago. We were lucky enough to do an Elijah Craig barrel pick, so that was
Yeah,
beautiful.
it's the exact same spot as 2 years ago, and now the I don't know if you were able to go to the bar upstairs. We've now opened the restaurant portion of the bar upstairs.
Oh, very cool.
So, John, do you have a number of distilleries you're going to see?
Yeah, we're doing Heather, how many distilleries are we going to? Like four or five? I was told by my wife I have to look at our travel sheet because I don't know it offhand. We're doing Makers, Willet, Heaven Hill, Four Roses, Beam, and Old Forester.
Oh, great, big boys. Well, you have to have the egg salad sandwich at Willet. Uh,
Okay.
I'd say do lunch at Maker's. I thought the egg salad sandwich was okay. Maker's food was way better, in my humble opinion.
I'm excited. I haven't
I'm
been to
just telling
most
you
of
what the
these.
internet says. I wouldn't necessarily disagree with what Vadim said. I haven't been to the restaurant at Maker, so I don't know. But the restaurant at Bardstown Bourbon Company is fantastic, and I have not been to our restaurant either. I'll be there in January for the first time. But I
Well, I will
do.
report back to the group of what good food I can find and what sort of fun scores we can get from the gift shops along the way.
Please do.
Nice.
So, as y'all are tasting through this, not knowing who's been a part of a tasting with me before or not for certain, you know, think about the different grains that are made that think about the different styles of bread that are made from these same grains as you're tasting through, right? Cornbread, sweet. Rye bread, spicy, punchy, big backbone, and then wheat bread, not a whole lot going on, right? What you're having with wheat bread, it's really just the vehicle to let in my case, the bacon, lettuce, and tomato shine through. And so when you're tasting, starting with the wheated bourbon, you're getting so much more of that 52% of the corn, right? As opposed to, see, I always forget the numbers. Um, 35% of the wheat there, right? There's so much more laying down. So you're getting that 52% corn and how that interacts with that level three char barrel for 6 years. It's really a wonderful flavor profile, um, and totally different from the wheated bourbon. And if you are traditional wheated bourbon, which if you'd like to try is the Larceny barrel proof, right?
So
I
that's the easy
have
way to tell them apart. Is Larceny is the wheater, and then Elijah Craig is the high rye
Yeah,
bourbon.
yeah. So the order for the grain to glass would be wheated traditional bourbon, then rye, and the order for the other three and corresponding would be Larceny with the wheated, Elijah Craig with the traditional bourbon, and then Pikesville with the rye.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. So for me, I don't know if you can hear it in my voice. I don't have a very good nose. I can't really smell a whole lot, so I definitely can't talk about the nose of too many whiskeys. It has to have a very strong nose for me to be able to really garnish anything. But you definitely get a lot of butterscotch, a lot of vanilla. I've heard some refer to it as a good sugar cookie, which is a great thing to talk about in the holiday season. But the thing for me that caught me the most surprised and off guard, being a fan of Old Fitz and Larceny Barrel Proof and Larceny, um, it's incredibly different, right? The flavor profiles, the experiences that I got out of not only this, but really all three of these was something entirely different than what I'm used to. And I've been drinking these products basically strictly for the last decade, right? So it was a big hats off to what Max was able to think about, and then what our team, most of this distillate we're still in the Denny Potter phase of distillation when he was our master distiller. But the one constant over the years really has been our lab and our master tasters, now led by a woman named Tawny Goatee. She's been at Heaven Hill for I think 35 years, and she was taught by Mike Sani, who was at Heaven Hill for 44 years. And he was taught by our original team, folks that have been around, that have ties back to the original distillery. So he was there. His first years were the last few years of Earl Beam's days, Parker's for early days as well. So
Jack, out of curiosity, I noticed that, I mean, Heaven Hill's never been shy with the high proof, and the grain and glass bourbon is quite a bit lower than normal. Is there a reason for that?
so each one of these was bottled at the proof that Tawny and the team deemed to show the whiskey the best. They are there are some sort of nods to various things, and then one is sort of this is just the way it tastes best. And the one that came out as we're doing it this proof because this is the way it tastes best was actually the wheated, right? They thought that this proof of 60.5, 121, or ABV of 60.5 proof of 121 was how this whiskey showed off the best. All three of these, like the other three, we're done with our traditional barrel entry of 125. So this did lose a little bit of proof over its 6 years of aging. They don't really give us the any of the details of where in the rick houses these have aged. They did age at one of our newer rick house campuses, Cox's Creek, which is really cool. Which is our for those of you that have been out there, and John, you're going next week. You may see some of the newer build rick houses, which are built dark as opposed to white. So that's a good sign that we're getting good whiskey out of these rick houses that have been built in the last decade. As you go through to the traditional bourbon, it is proofed at 107, and that was specifically as a nod to our original barrel entry proof, which was 107 until Parker Beam replaced his dad, Earl Beam, and Parker decided to change our barrel entry proof to 125, which we still do to this day. And then the rye whiskey was a nod to the popular nomenclature of barrel entry, or excuse me, barrel proof. So all of these are non-chill filtered. The rye is the only one that is bottled exactly as what it came out of in the final batch at barrel proof, and that is right around 120, 123, 123.2 to be exact. So each one of these followed the same distillation methods. The only difference was the percentages on the mash bill, and then of course the actual grain that came through. They were barreled in level 3 char barrels. They were entered at 125 proof, and then they were aged out at Cox's Creek. More than likely, like I said, they don't give us the exact locations of where they were in the rick houses, but more than likely these were center cut to upper floors. Generally speaking, that's where a 6 year age barrel is going to come out. And then as they were batched, like I said, um, the wheated bourbon bottled at the proof that tasted that it was deemed the best. The bourbon was bottled at 107, a nod to the original barrel entry proof. That's the one that won Whiskey Advocate number 5. And then, of course, the high rye was bottled at barrel proof.
Are the ABVs going to be relatively the same with each release throughout the year?
So the releases for each year release, so the 2024 release, they will be the exact same, all 3 releases, right? So um, don't think about them in terms of our barrel proofs, which have differed release to release. Think about them in terms of, say, Pikesville, a Pikesville rye or a Bernheim before the barrel proof came out. Those were actually all allocated items that we released 3 times a year as we were waiting for barrels to come of age. Same deal with these. So we'll be doing following that same model year over year. So next year, the grain may change, distillation style may change, barrel entry proof may change, warehouse may change. All those variables pre-production can change. But the final bottlings will be the same. It'll just be three different releases. Scrolling through the chat to see if there's anything I missed. Frosted Flakes, I like that as a flavor profile. Oh,
And who could be
Toddy's is
mad at
great.
Frosted Flakes?
Where's Tony? Tony, what did you buy when you were at Toddy's? You remember?
Uh, I did get some Heaven Hill there. I think I bought, that was a long time ago. I think I bought a 10-year-old Pappy. Uh,
This is my last purchase from Toddy's.
Oh, right.
Still got the price tag on it.
All right. I love
$33
that store.
and 25 cents for a handle of Old Fifth bottled and bond.
I love that store. I know they changed hands from the first time I've been there,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's a great little store.
Yeah, it's fun. There's a lot going on in Bardstown these days. They've got a Mr. Tubbs. John, you're going to be in Bardstown. Mr. Tubbs is a great new spot, great little restaurant, cocktail bar. You'll feel right at home. It feels very much like you're in LA, in Abbot Kinney or in Los Feliz or down in Manhattan Beach or something like that. Really well done, really tastefully done, with a definitely a bourbon focus for sure, and a Kentucky cuisine.
Yeah.
Um,
Hey, Jack.
yeah,
Uh, I got a question for you. And one of the first ones when I got into this 5 years ago, I tried the larceny small batch,
yep,
and I was like very underwhelmed. I was like, this is, and it soured me on it. Pardon the pun, but it soured me on it, and I was like, this is like a drain pour. But and one of the local suppliers said, "Here, you got to try this barrel proof that just came out. The C924, and this is fantastic."
yeah,
I mean, I'm like, I turned him down, and I'm like, I got to find this.
yeah.
Uh, do you get that? Have you heard people saying that? Because I've heard it from a couple of other people that have said,
Yeah,
but the
I,
barrel
I
proof
can
is
I
like
can tell you
completely
personally that was my reaction to larceny a number of years ago as well. And when my salesperson here in Los Angeles is on the call, being secretive. Um, he actually keeps all of the allocated bottles for Heaven Hill in California in his garage, so he has to be secretive. So
Oh,
no,
okay.
no, really, I'm kidding. Um, he and I did the first event in California with Larceny Barrel Proof in 2019, and he was standing with me when I took my first ever sip of the Barrel Proof, which 8 months later won Whiskey Advocate Whiskey of the Year. And my response was, "Oh fuck, that's good." Um,
Okay.
and
I'm not crazy.
I was so excited about Larceny Barrel Proof, that I developed a separate tasting, which was basically tasting our Old Fitzgerald distillate, which is what that eventually becomes, from
Mhm.
new make, so fresh off the still, all the way up through 8 years of barrel proof. And Larceny Barrel Proof has continued to be a winner, all three releases, you know, for 20, 21, 22, 23, and now three releases. So 15 total releases of that. Larceny
Cool.
small batch. I don't have really any details
Mhm.
why or how, outside of the fact of I was standing with Denny, who I've mentioned a couple of times, or is our former master distiller, um, right before he left, in 2018 or so, and he goes, "Damn, that's a good fucking batch." And I was like, huh, interesting. And that was when it first really hit me when I heard him say that small batches is really a living, breathing thing, right? And
Mhm.
our master tasters and what they're doing really influence that. I was introduced to a cocktail with Larceny end of 21, 22, I can't remember. So it started to become that I liked, and it started to become something that I started to go more and more towards. I also read the book. This is a long-winded answer to your question, but I promise it's there. The answer is going to get here. I also read that book, that Wright Thompson, who's the ESPN reporter, wrote with Julian Van Winkle. I think I read that towards the end of the pandemic, and Julian said his preferred way to drink, is rip 10 year on a cube with a lemon peel. And I was like, larceny's sort of similar to that. Let me give that a shot. I really started drinking that. That cocktail, which was a perfect Manhattan, a lemon peel with larceny on a cube, got me more attuned to calling for larceny to the point where I started ordering it neat pretty regularly, probably 18 to 24 months ago. And I haven't had any of the off-putting notes that I had prior, um, prior to that. Um, and so I've started to do a little bit of digging, and I know that some things have been worked out in the supply chain and the production of our OFD. And it's interesting, because OFD, which is the name that we call our distillate for Old Fitzgerald, um, and Larceny, makes all of those, right? And some of those off-putting notes, I think, were coming out at a lower proof, but weren't coming out at the higher proofs, right? They weren't coming out at barrel proof. They weren't coming out at 100 proof bottled and bond. And I think now we've got everything really, really dialed in. So I would say go back to one, I don't disagree with you. Two, Larceny Barrel Proof has been a winner for now 5 years, and I'm glad that you had. I'd love for you to tell me that story so I can go give that guy or gal a high five. And I would say give Larceny 92 Proof another shot, because I've had a handful of discussions, sort of like, did Larceny get a lot better? And people have been like, yeah, I've noticed that too. So you were not totally wrong to say that. But I think to that point, we were making some great batches of Larceny, and we were, I'm not going to say striking out, but maybe we were hitting like the Yankees in the World Series, and now I think we're hitting like the Dodgers.
Oh,
Sorry,
oh,
I know
Boom.
there's some East Coast people.
Boom.
I know there's some East Coast people on the call, but if it makes you feel any better, I'm a Braves fan, so
Well, all I can say is the Larceny barrel proof is got a nose that's to die for. Um, I started out as my son, who's on here as well, would tell you as a wine guy, and he got me into bourbon. His fault, Michael's fault. Anyway, but yeah, it's so for me, I attack everything from the nose, nose, nose,
yeah.
nose, and because that's what I've been trained to do in wine for so much, and then taste. But the Larceny's just got a nose that I could sit here and sniff all day long. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, you can, like I said, you can probably hear it in my voice. I have severe allergies to Los Angeles, and even though I live here,
Well, good thing you don't live in Oregon, because let me tell you, it gets twice, no, 10
it's
times worse.
I'm sure my wife is hearing me, and she's like, "You asshole, you're not allergic to LA." I've just, as I've gotten older, my allergy to dust has gotten worse and worse, and it's just really bad here. And I'm envious of your nose, because that's one of the things that I just don't really get to experience too often.
Yeah,
And
I have a hard time too since I moved to Oregon, because everything around me is what I'm into, which is wine.
yeah,
I'm in the Willamette Valley, but it's also where all the pollen. I mean, it's like it's
right,
crazy. So yeah, I fight it every day.
yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I haven't seen the Alex. That's quite a lineup. Is that every Elijah Craig barrel proof dating back to 2016?
No, the first one in there's B521.
Okay.
And
Oh,
there's
oh,
and I'm
that's right.
missing
You said that.
I'm
Okay.
missing one in the middle, but and there's a few single barrels and the toasted barrel in there as well.
Cool. My reading comprehension is
Some,
hilarious.
need some help finding that C923 evidently, Jack. Maybe you could help him out.
The nine the
It's right
nine
here.
923 was not an easy bottle to find.
It's right here.
Oh,
I got it.
it's right there.
I got four of them.
No,
Oh,
it's actually the only one that I have. It's
Jordan, you have four of
I
everything.
get usually I get, so this is a Parker's Heritage. This is usually the sample I get. And Elijah Craig Barrel Proof is the only sample bottle that I get sent from the distillery, that for the last 8 years that I've been getting sent samples, I always get a full bottle of those, which is very exciting. Not even the Larceny Barrel Proofs. It's like there's 3 releases a year. I'll get one full bottle and two of those small bottles.
I'm just impressed at Alex's willpower, because if I get an ECBP, I drink the damn thing.
Yeah, no, it's
uh,
funny.
I have duplicates of most of those.
There was an article maybe end of last week or Monday morning that the state of Ohio is introducing a bill because they're a control state, right? Like Oregon, Jim, where you are. So the state controls everything, and they're thinking about there's a bill under consideration that allocated bottles have to be opened at the store, um, which will cut down on the secondary market. And I
That's
posted
because
that.
the
I was like,
state
oh, this is an interesting
that
point.
that's because the state rep got, he has 10 people in line in front of him
Right.
and he
Yeah.
can't get one.
That hasn't happened I think that's only Oregon so far where they've caught them, but yeah, it happens everywhere, I think. But anyhow.
In Oregon, they got caught big time.
Yeah, really big. I was with the Speaker of the House of Oregon back in September, and we were talking about that. And she was pissed because she was like, "What the fuck? Why didn't they give me any bottles?"
Yeah, well, we have this thing that goes on every year where there's a lottery thing that you can sign into
Yeah.
and buy a bunch of bottles theoretically if your number is drawn. And I've been doing it now for 3, 4 years and I haven't gotten anything yet. So we'll see.
Yeah, I grew up mostly in Virginia, and I fairly regularly am getting texts from my buddies there about the terrible lottery that is there. They also got caught. I think 4 or 5 guys that work for the state got in trouble for doing that. Unfortunately, in LA, the only people that are doing anything like that are the people that are messing with tee times at the public golf courses. So it's not really helping any of us for bourbon wise. Um, so it looks like, Vadim, I don't know if you've released the results of the survey, but just my quick um, my quick scan of the chat. It looks like my favorite was the majority's favorite in here, which is the weeded very was my number one, but the rye was my number two.
All right,
I
you're
do
pretty close. The
I do
result.
like I do like the bourbon a lot. Um, but the rye was for me, there's this crazy like somewhere in between Dr. Pepper, Coca-Cola, and Cheerwine flavor profile that just got me really excited. And the really funny thing, talking about talking about different people's flavor profiles and different experiences and batching. Um, the samples that I got from the distillery in May were entirely different from the samples that are the finished product, which it was sort of blew me away when I was at the launch event in Kentucky when we did this. Nose on the rye is amazing, I'm being told. So yeah, that's my memory. I've got nothing right now. I'm speaking of my lack of nose, a friend of mine from Virginia just sent me 36 different 50 ml samples from different distillates, different distilleries all over the country. And I'm trying to do 4 a night. I can't, I've done 8 so far. I can't nose one of them. So, and it just goes to show how bad my nose is. So, as y'all tasted through those, you know, hopefully you have a little bit left of the grain to glass, and you can taste them side by side, starting with the Larceny barrel proof, going to the Elijah Craig barrel proof and the rye. Or realistically, if you're going to taste them through proof, you could start with the rye, being that the Pikesville is the lowest of those 3 proofs. But the idea of banding these six bottles together, or really the 3 bottles with the 3 bottles, is to show the innovation, right? That we are still doing, even as an almost 90-year-old distillery. You have in Elijah Craig, you have the same distillate that we've been making continuously since December 13th, 1935. So next Friday, we will be celebrating our 89th year in business. That HH Reg, as we call it, 78% corn, 12% malted barley, and 8% rye, 10% rye, excuse me. That's the same distillate that we've been making since Ed, Gary, George, David, and Mo Shapiro were collaborating with Harry and Joe Beam on what would eventually become Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond in 1939. And then we made that distillate and that distillate only until we got that pretty cool phone call in 1982. Cool for us, not so cool for them. But pretty cool phone call in 1982 from the folks at Monumental Distilling in Maryland to let us know that they had finally sold the last barrel of their Pikesville rye. Their distillery had been turned off since 1972. Would you guys want to acquire us, right? And that was the first rye whiskey that we started making. Parker and his dad and his son at the time learned how to make rye whiskey, trying to make rye to put in the Pikesville bottles to send back to DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And really from 1982 until 2013 or 14, that was basically a 3-year-old 80 proof rye, and that was it, right? And then as you evolve through the 90s and the 80s and 90s and the doldrums of American whiskey, and then of course that horrific moment for us in November of 1996 when old Heaven Hill Springs burned down, we had to eventually find a new distillery, right? And fortunately for us, again, United Distillers, now known as Diageo, decided that American whiskey was dead and they got rid of all of their main assets, right? That main asset being the Bernheim facility, right? The working distillery of the two distilleries that they own. Of course, they still own Stutzelweller that hasn't functioned in quite some time. That was when we started making wheated bourbon in 2000, right? And Parker and his son Craig followed the same process for the other regional brands that we'd acquired up until that time, and it was basically get on the still, figure out what tastes good to you, and we'll put it in the bottle of where it's going, and we'll sell it to the folks that recognize the bottle, right? Because there wasn't this idea of discerning palates of American whiskey, and for the most part, Old Fitzgerald at that time really was just that 4-year-old bottle and bond. I say just that 4-year-old bottle and bond, but it's 100% fantastic. Honey on the grain to glass rye is amazing. I have some amazing pairing notes and tastings for the grain to glass, and once you're able to get a bottle of each of these, all of them do pair so well with grilled meats, which is my favorite pairing with any American whiskey. Of course, my doctor tells me that my cholesterol tells him that that's the case as well, but that's beside the point. So as we've evolved as a distillery over the course of the last 89 years or so, and then sort of planting our stake in the ground of, yes, we're a heritage distillery, but we are nimble and mobile enough to be able to, as a family-owned and operated distillery, we are nimble with the ability to be innovative, to do what the quote unquote craft or micro distilleries are doing as well, and do it really, really, really well. So doing this tasting today, the day after we were validated with that by getting one of Whiskey Advocate's top 10 whiskeys of the year with the traditional bourbon was a big deal for us. So yes, I agree. The Larceny Barrel Proof is so damn tasty. I haven't poured myself any yet. I've been talking too much. What other questions do
But
you have about what's going on at Heaven Hill? What's been going on or what's coming in the future?
I have a question. So you said the grain to glass bourbon is the one that won the recent award.
Yes.
So just curious, like your thoughts, because the consensus here was that that placed like third
Yeah.
across our group. So what, just curious,
Yeah.
what the panelists said and how come that one won the award, but it seems to be not the lesser of the G to Ds. So.
Yeah, I mean it's as I said, I've been presenting and tasting these three whiskeys across the country, and even in Canada since June, and I've been shocked. I tasted through the final bottlings in June, and I was like, oh man, the wheated's still the best. The rye solidified as 1B, maybe 1A, and the bourbon is good, but it's still my third. Um, I've seen people go hard at me. No, the bourbon's the best by far and away. The wheated sucks. The rye's fine. And that's the great part about doing tastings like this. It's the greatest thing about tasting, really, not just American whiskey, or spirits, just beverage alcohol in general, is it is such a perfect environment. I can throw the website with David Fleming, who's the main panelist who writes the reviews for these, into the chat, so you guys can read it. But at the end of the day, it comes down to really his and his panel of folks palates and what they're doing. So am I gonna say I'm shocked that that was the one that he chose? No, but maybe a little bit, right? I mean, I definitely like from the bourbons, I definitely like the weeded better. But hey, we'll take what we can get when it comes to awards, because it is definitely probably the most fickle part of this industry and this fandom that we all have of American whiskey and spirits and bourbon.
A question I have on the grain of glass is really, and you have no control of this, but the price point is just a little different. I just think of Heaven Hill as being one of those that
You said it right there. You don't have to say anything else. You think of Heaven Hill as being, and then finish that sentence. So that we are the distillery that gets the most discussion in regards to our pricing. Whereas I could list, as long as the chat is going right now, the number of craft and micro localized distilleries that are putting 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 3, 4-year-old, 5-year-old. I think someone put in the chat, or maybe Michael, is the way you referenced larceny. It was a drain pour equivalent to that are priced at 100, 125, 150, 175, 200, yada yada yada. So people are, I think we unfairly get judged as everyone's favorite inexpensive pour. Being a family owned and operated distillery, we've been able to become everyone's favorite inexpensive pour because we've priced them the way that we've wanted to price them, not necessarily what the market has done, or what our colleagues throughout the American whiskey industry have done. And as my colleague Bernie Lubbers says regularly, we're in the bourbon business, not the bourbon charity. And so we've sort of followed suit to try to elevate not only our quality, but our perception, right? I mean, you look at this bottle versus this bottle, right? There's a lot that goes into that, right? So I get it, because look, I loved this bottle. I hated to see it go away at $11 a bottle. But going back to what I said earlier, when I would meet liquor store owners or aficionados, and you know, I was able to say, yeah, you probably started following us in 2015 or 2016, and it was probably a bottle of Elijah Craig Barrel Proof or Henry McKenna. Same can be said, oh man, why did you discontinue Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond? Well, my response to that was, so you got your first bottle when? 2015, 2016, right before we discontinued it, when it was all of the chatter. But if people had bought that bottle 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005, ongoing the same way that they'd bought, trying to see if I have other things, something like this, that bottle may still be around, right? So you have to think of it from a business perspective, and it's not to be totally shallow and totally blunt about it, but it's a unique product. It's a grain that we have worked with a seed purveyor to develop, It's not a commodity grain that we're getting from a farm that is just going through and plowing their fields and delivering. And none of what we're doing is that, right? The relationships that we have had with these farmers over 7 to 8, 9 decades in some cases, they are relationships that we have, right? The relationships that we have with Busick that builds our $10 million a piece rick houses. John, when you're in Kentucky, take some pictures that you can share with the group. Looks like a wood, it's a wood structure wrapped in tin that costs $10 million a pop to build, right? So again, not to be blunt or short, but this is a unique product, right? And what we all know from Econ 101, supply and demand, right? There is a little supply of this. There is a small amount of what we are growing of this corn, what we are distilling, and then what we are putting out. So historically, yes, our products have been less expensive than others, and for the most part, our portfolio still is less expensive than others. But this is an elevated, more unique product from our portfolio, and therefore, I think really warrants maybe even a higher price tag than it has so far, especially as we develop through and get more and more unique with the offering.
So you guys
Yeah, if
see
I
like
could enter real quick. I don't disagree with your comment that it is a rarefied kind of situation there. You're growing the corn, you know, the cost is higher to produce this product. It is a rare product compared to your regular lineup, even the Larceny Barrel Proof, the Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, etc. And as you continue doing it, I'm sure that the product itself will continue to improve. I guess my concern is that for people like us who are drinking on a day-to-day basis, we are bourbon aficionados, if you will, consumers, virtual tasters. If we buy a bottle of this and then we buy a bottle of Larceny Barrel Proof and we go, damn, that Barrel Proof, it's just better. What's to stop us from just continuing to buy the Barrel Proof? So my hope is that as you guys, as Heaven Hill continues to do this grain to glass project, which I think is pretty badass, that the cost to benefit ratio will improve to a point where the price point makes more sense to somebody like myself, who would probably at this point rather reach for a Larceny Barrel Proof than like a Heaven Hill grain to glass weeded bourbon. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I going back to what I was saying about the award. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it comes down to personal preference, and I totally respect your opinion and what you choose to purchase for sure. I mean, you're never going to hear me say stop buying Larceny Barrel Proof.
I sure hope not, because that stuff is good.
Yeah, no, I don't think you have to worry about that going anywhere. No, and
Since you're talking about price,
go ahead.
Jack, I was going to say, since you're talking about price, I might as well throw it out there. Mission has been running a special. I know you're from LA, but Mission has been running a special on Old Fitz 10 at $300. Now, that's
a
low
special
secondary. Well, I mean, if you can't find it for MSRP, but
right.
I mean,
yeah,
that's a hell of a price.
Yeah, I mean, look, and that's what I was sort of alluding to, talking about the new bill being introduced in Ohio.
Yeah.
A lot of y'all's qualms, a lot of the qualms on the internet and discussion forums and the bourbon world, a lot of the problem is the secondary market. And it's as simple as that.
Well, it's not a matter of just.
I don't know how many people have any insight into what wholesale prices are of these bottles and what MSRP is of these bottles, but I mean those are things that can be easily discovered with a quick Google search. And I've found that the majority of bourbon aficionados that I've come across in the last 10 years are very efficient at very deep dives into Reddit and Google. So, it's I'll sort of leave the pricing discussion at that. I mean, I love
Oh,
Mission, I love Ed, I love everything that those guys do. There's a that we're those of you that are on the chat that are in California, and even Jim, you're in Oregon, you get great pricing because the state sets it and they can't inflate stuff as long as you can find it. We're very fortunate in California that we have a lot of great stores. I don't know why you're putting that bottle up. That's blended whiskey. Oh,
I mean, it's funny that you mentioned that, and especially about Ohio, because I mean, there are two guys, at least two guys on the tasting that are from Ohio that I'll buy stuff for and ship it to them
yeah.
because they can't get it.
I mean, I
And
can tell you that the majority of my understanding is the majority of the online business out of this state is shipped to states that are much closer to my distillery than far from my distillery, if you catch my drift.
oh
Uh,
yeah,
so and look,
absolutely.
and working for a distillery, being from a bourbon drinking culture, being from a bourbon drinking family where bourbon's been a part of my life my entire life, and living in California, um, it's not as big of a thing here as it is there. And again, it all goes back to the secondary market because the secondary market started there and has grown, and going back to what I was talking about at the beginning, you're seeing the exact same patterns with tequila as you are seeing and have seen with bourbon, right? I was in a liquor store this morning. One guy came in looking for JTS Brown, and I was like, high five. I wish I could, if they sold it in California, I'd buy it for you. That's one of our products. It's not available here. And then the next guy came in looking for a bottle of Blanton's, right? And it's like, he was either going to ask for a bottle of Blanton's or a bottle of Fortaleza, right? So, go back. Yeah, Tony. I think that's my last bottle of Heaven Hill Bottle and Bond as well. I actually, the this isn't what the label says. This is a barreling an aging project I did, that I'll open when my son turns 21. He's 5. But we discontinued this one as well. I bought a case of it when I was doing that cross country trip, and I gave it away as gifts as I was driving cross country to my friends that were letting me stay with me, and I'm so bummed because I think that's as much as I have left. So those two are tandem. The green label is 90 proof, the white label is 100 proof. If you find a bottle of that, be stoked. Just reading through the chat.
I think Heaven Hill, the white label, the bottle and bond is everybody's favorite.
You're
Like,
talking about the one that I just showed?
yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. I mean, the reintroduction of that is great as well. The 7-year Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond, and that was an allocated product when we first put it out in 2019. It was actually only available in 4 states. California was one, and we now have, Connor Denny raised production from 800 to 1,200 barrels in 2014. And then Connor raised the 1,200 to 1,500 in 2019. So, you can do the math. The amount of barrels and product that we have available in some of these other SKUs has grown. And Heaven Hill Bottled and Bond really is one of those products that is the most has received the most fortune from that, because that is the product that really is our home place whiskey, right? That's the signature of the Heaven Hill provenance. And again, we're in California where we have retailers that I think are still a little gun shy to do case stacks or put stuff out there of things that have historically been allocated. But if you do go to the rest of the country, and hopefully this will come to California, you're seeing a lot more availability. You're seeing that on back bars a lot more. You're seeing it on cocktail menus, and it's just a great whiskey. And you want to go to price. You don't want to spend you don't want to spend $100 on a grain to glass. A bottle of Heaven Hill bottle about 7 year is right around $50. So you can get two. You go in with $100 bill. What do you got there? Jordan's got the new Larceny Barrel Proof.
Yeah, how come the revamp of the label? Just a marketing decision, or is there anything behind it?
Yeah, because that bottle looks way better than the old bottle. I'll leave it at that. The Dean's recording this, so I'm probably already going to get in trouble if this recording gets into the wrong hands. But I'll leave that when that bottle looks exponentially better. I was very thankful to see that. More could be done.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Yeah, I have seen Michael, to your point, I have seen the secondary coming down. If I'm being totally honest, I don't spend a whole lot of time there. Um, I need another bottle of bourbon in my collection, like I need a hole in my head. But it
Somebody,
is fun to see.
somebody brought up the Elijah Craig C923. There was the alleged difference between the two laser codes as being micro batches. Is there anything? I mean, I have both bottles. I haven't done a side by side. I don't know. I mean, it seems like bullshit to me, but does it make
It
any sense?
it's just the laser codes are just different bottling runs.
Right. Same. It's the same.
Yeah.
They're vatted, right? I mean, once it's bad, I mean, there's no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember somebody asked me, I don't remember the specifics of the question, but if you have them and you want to tell me the laser codes, I can tell you the specific differences between them. But yeah, they're the same batch.
I always say that if it sounds like bullshit, it is likely
Well,
bullshit.
I don't want to get too deep into it, but social media is an interesting place to live.
Are we tasting the barrel proof yet? The Elijah Craig or the Larceny? Or has everybody else been tasting them? Because
I've been tasting through all of them.
I'm really enjoying this Elijah Craig. It's quite delicious, but I had to add quite a bit of water to it to kind of bring the
Vidian,
fire
can
in.
you remind me which sample I gave y'all? Was it the C924 or the B524?
B5.
524.
B524. All right, let me.
Yeah, for Elijah Craig it's the B, and for Larceny it's the C.
I remember that now. Okay, that's the
Funny enough,
C924.
I just went to Norway to visit some distilleries, and I brought a sample, a barrel pick of Elijah Craig to share. And I got there, and they informed me that in Norway, it is the country's laws that they're not allowed to bottle anything higher than 59.9. So the fact that I had a sample of Elijah Craig at 67 something percent was considered narcotics. And they're like, if you get caught with this, you're going to jail. I was like, oh, well, Merry Christmas. I'm leaving this here for you.
It's pretty amazing the differences in the. I mean, maybe it sounds stupid. I don't know, but until you really start to sit down and talk to the folks in the different countries or the folks that work with the different countries, it's amazing the rules and regulations. I had my first meeting with our international team summer of, I can't remember if it was 22 or 23. But there was a rule and regulation in South Korea, which is an interesting thing to talk about in the last 24 hours. Um, we didn't have we had not affixed an additional label to our bottles of regular Evan Williams Black. We had something like 55 pallets of Evan Williams Black sitting in customs in South Korea for like 6 months because it didn't have this one sticker on it that, relates that their TTB or FDA um, requires. And like you think of the US and Canada being very similar. Like Canada's FDA TTB situation is totally different than what we are. We have multiple products that we can't export to Canada because their system says it's not good for Canadians. So more for us, I guess. I just realized that I have those bottles, so let me pour a sample of whatever.
The Canadian whiskey situation is horrible up there for bourbon. My wife is from Toronto, and then we go up there every Christmas.
Well,
It's a pain point.
go to Alberta, and it's much better.
Well, yeah, because in Alberta, there's nothing to do but, grill oil and drink. So,
Well, no, the provinces all operate differently, and most every province except Alberta operates to my conversation earlier with John, operates like a control state. So
yep,
Ontario controls it all, and they're terrible.
they're
Um,
horrible. Yeah, LCBO is the
Whereas
worst.
Alberta is Alberta is like Texas, so it's like a four-tier system where the state gets it, province gets it, but then they have privately held. I was there a month ago, and it was amazing. I did Vancouver and Victoria, and then Calgary, and it was amazing to see what was available in Calgary, which you think of as sort of like, Dallas, not or Houston, right?
Hmm.
Vancouver, a very highfalutin, one of the two or three most expensive cities in the world. Their selection was not as good as what the selection was in downtown Calgary. And then our person that runs Canada is based in Toronto, and he was like, you would laugh at how bad the situation is there. He's like that.
So, ironically, I walked away with 6 bottles of Weller 107 for $28 Canadian a piece.
Well, and that's the
So,
other thing is it's like going to middle America. Nobody knows what they have when you find
yep.
them. I do have so you said B524, right, Fitting?
Yep.
And C924 for the larceny.
Yep.
Has anybody been to the Chestnut Club in Santa Monica? I was messing around. It's if you've been to Scopa in Venice, for those of you that are LA based, it's the smaller cocktail bar from the same minds behind Scopa and Old Lightning, as well as Dama, downtown. I was messing around with some of their cocktail recipes for Thanksgiving, which was I did an Elijah Craig rye and Vago mezcal cocktail that they have called El Camino. It was delicious.
Scope is really good. Dom is phenomenal. I've not done Chestnut Club yet.
As long as
Um,
they serve Chestnut Farms, then they're good.
Say that one more time.
So our favorite drink is Chestnut Farms. That's what it's always recommended to us when we go to Total Wine and can't find a good bottle.
Oh, don't know. Yeah, Dama and Scope are anytime someone's coming to town, I'm like, I don't know if you're going to Venice or downtown, but you should.
That white bean puree at Dama is a thing of dreams.
With the pork. Oh my God.
Oh, so good.
Yeah. So trying to remember who it was. Was it I think it was Michael. Um Michael's number one fan of Larceny Barrel Proof. This C924 is 125.8 proof. So just above the barrel entry proof. Larceny Barrel Proof is generally of these three comparisons to the grain to glass. Larceny Barrel Proof and Pikesville are going to be the most similar in an aging perspective because their Larceny is a 6 to 8 year range small batch, and then Pikesville is all 6 years old. And of course, the grain to glasses are all 6 years old. And Vadim, when I was coming up with this tasting this summer, I texted Connor. I was like, so Connor, I'm thinking about having trouble coming up with like what's an engaging discussion about grain to glass, and I'm thinking about putting them side to side with Larceny Barrel Proof, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof, and Pikesville, and he was like, "That's fucking genius." And he came up with the tagline "Heritage versus Innovation." So we got the seal of approval for this.
When would be the next release of the grain to glass weeded?
So it should be on every spring we'll start the new releases. The next release of this specific version should be shipping in the next few weeks, probably right after the new year. So you should
Thank you.
start to see some of that um, out there. Mission would probably be a good place to look.
I'm
Cypress
in
down.
Florida.
Sorry.
I'm in Florida,
Oh, where in Florida are you?
near Pensacola.
Ooh, that is
Yeah,
sort of a barren wasteland.
nobody ever goes up there.
Um, if you'll connect with Vadim, I'll try to find you some spots. My wife is from Florida, so I have a special place for it in my heart. I believe we have a salesperson based in the Panhandle now.
Oh, great.
So I'll see if I can figure out a place, a good spot to send you.
All right, great. Thank you.
Cheers, Tony.
And you're saying there's no difference between the three releases throughout the year,
Correct.
but annually you'll be able to. It says I
The
can see.
changes will be year to year.
Okay. So this one says release 2024. So obviously next year is going to say 2025. So are
Right.
these going to be a collector's item at some point, or are they not? They're meant to be just
I
pop.
mean, I think they already are, right?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean that's the idea, right? Is that they will, especially these first ones are, and then hopefully, depending on how they are received over probably the first 4 to 5 years, um, you know, the information is slow dripped about what the plans are for them for sure. But I can tell you that I'm very excited for what I've heard, sort of reading between the lines of what people have told me about what's to come. Um, but no, I'm just tasting the Larceny Barrel Proof versus the weeded Heaven Hill branded glass, and it's just shocking to me how different they are.
It's interesting that you guys have. I'm looking over his like lately. You've leaned into naming more things Heaven Hill rather than other brands, right? Because the 7 year Heaven Hill came out, and then these three new Heaven Hills have come out. Is it a more of a push to have Heaven Hill become the brand name that people follow?
Yeah, I mean, I think look, I think it had to happen, right? And I think that, um, when you think about when you think about farm to table, right? That's been a part of our foodways, especially in California, for the better part of the last 50 years. And the international food space has gone that way in the last 20 years for sure. And the beverage side of the food and beverage scene, some started to do that, we'll call it 15 years ago, but really in the last 5 to 10 years, 8 years, um, everyone has realized that there's this thing called social media, there's this thing called the internet, where everybody has access to way more, way more, way more information than there ever has before. And there has long been a belief, that where it was made wasn't necessarily that important. I'm not saying that was my belief, I'm just saying that there has been that belief, maybe in the greater, um, beverage alcohol space, right? And I think wine and food has taught us that people want to know their maker, right? People want to know where it comes from. And we I think we're maybe a little gun shy at first because of, you posted the bottle of the blended whiskey, right? Blended whiskey, and put a really bad stain on American whiskey, right? And I think that affected a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And it took a lot of decision makers a little bit longer than others to get out of that headspace. So long story short, the brands that Elijah Craig, Evan Williams, Larceny, Old Fitz, Henry McKenna, are not going to go away. But yeah, you're going to see a more concerted effort, um, towards Heaven Hill. Maybe not the broad range, but for elevated offerings moving forward. We have the Heaven Hill Heritage Collection that's now 3 years running. We had the 27-year-old. We had the 85th anniversary 4 years ago. Of course, the reintroduction of the bottled and bond. So I'm not aware of any others that will carry that name. I mean, shit, we've got 125 different brands of straight whiskey coming out of Bernheim across the world that we have to worry and think about. So my hope is that there aren't too many more, but I'm okay if we do a couple of innovations here and there for sure. And I won't name names, but somebody asked if we can do a heritage tasting, and I'm like, sure, if you guys want to buy the bottles, I'll happily tell you all about them.
Vadim, could you get on that, please? Thanks.
Right on it. All I have to do is raid Jordan's cabinet. They're all there.
So, Vadim, can you do has everybody, I don't know if everybody's tasted through everything, but Vadim, can you do another um, quiz, whatever it's called, of who I want to see the favorites of the other three. And
Well,
then I want to
I
see,
have one set up for the overall favorite, but let me split it out to just
and
those.
I was going to say I want to see that one as well.
All right, let me split it out to those three as well. One sec.
I got about 10 more minutes and then I got a jet.
All right, sounds good. Favorite of the core.
Has everyone had any of the Heaven Hill Heritages?
I have the 8-year rye, and I have the what is it, the carousel that everyone hated, but I love.
Oh, you're talking about the Parker's Heritage.
Oh yeah, sorry. You said
Oh,
Heaven Hill like the 27. Yeah.
the Curacao is one of my favorite bottles that we've put out in the 10 years that I've been working for Heaven Hill, and I'm not
Love it.
afraid to scream it from the rafters.
People like were shitting all over, it, and I was like, I'm sorry, it is an old fashioned glass, and I'll drink it all day long. It is
I,
fantastic.
it is, it is.
That's two people that like that. Got it.
I guarantee you, I'll put that in a blind tasting, and you'll be the third. Because
No, I've had it a few times. It's not bad. I've had it against like some of the other Parkers, the heavy char, which I really like the heavy char, and then the double barrel, which was my favorite that I had.
look, I mean, I feel like you guys can probably tell I'm fairly honest in my feedback. I think it probably took us a little bit longer than maybe we would have liked, or maybe it should have, for us to put out a rye under the Parker's Heritage label. And I think that was part of the pushback. Part of that is that it was so off the wall. Um, and look, if you want to talk about making lemonade out of lemons, or chicken salad out of chicken shit, I think that the feedback that we got from that pushed our ideation to now creating what is the Heaven Hill Heritage, right? And look,
I had a bar
the current
like
Parker's Heritage, the malt whiskey age and cognac, is the second iteration of the partnership that created that curacao, right? I mean that was a collaboration between Parker Beam and Elaine Royer, who is the master blender at Cointreau. So, you know,
yeah, that makes sense. Double barrels still
As much as you say people don't like that one, but somehow I've never seen it on a shelf.
and I can tell you that it has been bottled in other labels at our visitor center, and it flies off the shelf in that under that label. But you're recording, and I'm not going to tell you all our secrets while you're recording.
Sorry about that. Had a little glitch in the system. All right, the votes are in for the core three. Click that out, and then vote for your favorite of the night. You got to pick one. What was your favorite bottle of the night? Let's see if the grain of glass will beat out the core range. There's so much information on the labels. I love that. I love how the transparency of that.
Yeah, the design. I've again, I've long been I've long given feedback on our bottles and our labels, and I'm a big fan of what we did here.
It's always funny to me, like especially last couple of weeks I've been visiting distilleries, and every time I go to a distillery and they're like, our mash bill's proprietary. I'm like, really? Like, come on. You could tell me exactly your proportions. I'm never gonna be able to duplicate it. Nor would I. Like, it's always the nobodies that like hide their mash bill. Like, who's gonna try to replicate your stuff? Come on.
Well, Beam does and Sazerac does as well. Buffalo Trace, but
Yeah, but I'm saying
yeah,
like
I mean we
Philly.
our tagline used to be, we're fine with being transparent. We like to be transparent because it's going to take you, $1 billion and at least 4 years of patience. Well, 6 to 7 years because you got to build the distillery and then you got to distill it and then it's got to be right and then you got to age it and then Wilderness Trail basically did it.
Yeah.
But look, we love what they're doing over there, and we're good friends with Dr. Pat and everybody over there, and they're putting out they definitely have stuff that is they know everyone's mash bill, right? Because they are supplying or helping with every part of production when it fucks up. But yeah, you're 100% right. Like I agree. It's like, why wouldn't you tell me?
But it's like even if they know their mash bill, I don't know of anyone who says, "Oh yes, I love Buffalo Trace product X," and somebody
Well,
copied them and made exactly the same thing that I could like. That doesn't happen. You don't duplicate. Like they both exist on the shelf separately, and you'll drink both.
Well, I mean, if I'm being honest, half the people that I meet out in the world think that Buffalo Trace and Weller is the same mash bill. So
Yeah. Well,
take that to a greater microcosm. So I'll tell y'all how I voted, and I promise it was not because of the award. And I was actually sort of mad at myself. The grain to glass bourbon was my favorite as I just went through all six.
wow. All right, I'm gonna close down the polls. Oh, let me invite everyone to jump on their camera. John, Michael, James, let's see if we can get everyone on camera for a quick second as we're wrapping this up. Ian, let's go. Michael, kick him. There we go. There we go. Pam,
John, to your comment, we have the Beam family use strain. So we have, I guess, a proprietary one, but we're not the only ones using it.
everyone in the Beam family uses it.
As far as I'm aware, we use the same use strain as Beam does. But I don't have an email stating that that's the truth, so don't quote me.
All right. All right, we got most of the people back on. We'll pencil in everyone else. I love everybody, people wearing the hats. Thank you, by the way, for the awesome Elijah Craig swag. Everybody got some, and we're gonna also raffle it off at the end. But we want to say thanks to Jack and to everyone who showed up tonight, and raise a glass and smile to the camera. Hold on one sec. There we go. Got it. That's it. Thank you so much for being here. It's been an absolute pleasure. We enjoyed learning and tasting. And yeah,
Thanks, guys. And
let's
Jim, get down to Wilderness Trail. It's a lot of fun. You'll more than likely run across Dr. Pat. He's there all the time.
so the answers to the polls, let me show you them. The core range, Larceny took it by a hair, actually, surprisingly. So and Pikesville took 0 votes in the core range. But Larceny and Elijah Craig were neck and neck.
It's as I was thinking about what we were going to talk about tonight. I was like, you know what? It really is unfair to Pikesville to taste against these other five because 110 proof just does not stand up to 120 plus, especially in this range.
Especially it being the last one. It was at the very end. Maybe if we started with it, it would have maybe held its own. But yeah, in
And
general,
look,
it's
you guys tell me this is the first time that I've done this tasting in public. Um, would you say start with the traditional range and start with Pikesville as the lowest proof, or what do you think? You guys can be my guinea pigs.
Let's start with the lower proof.
and I honestly I would do, but rather than keeping the grainy glasses together, because
Do
they're
them side
paired
by side, each
side by
style.
side of each one. That's what I would
Okay.
do.
Thought about that as well. I thought about all of those. Cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
and
it's a tough one either way.
I would say that normally I would never start with a rye because it could, change your palate a little. But with this lineup, the bourbons are so powerful and unctuous. Like I'm not. It's not like I'll be blown for the rest of the tasting. I'm not Shane. No offense, Shane.
Yeah. I mean, when I did it the first time, um, I did it side by side, like John just said in the chat. So
The problem is the grain of glass bourbon is so low proof compared to the others. That's going to make it tough. But all
yeah,
right,
I think it still has enough. I mean, like I said, I just went back through all six and it was my favorite. I think it has enough character that it holds up.
all right, and the final votes for the everybody's favorite of the night. It's pretty all over the place, but the winner is the
Wow.
The
first
leader.
place. It's the wheated bourbon from Grain and Glass,
Wow.
followed by Larceny and Elijah Craig in second, tied. So that's kind of cool.
Cool. Don't take that off. I'm gonna take a screenshot.
I've heard that before.
Yeah. You've heard don't take that off?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what she said.
I'm sorry.
Hmm.
Cool, cool. Well, guys, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Vadim, please connect me with Tony in Florida.
Will do.
I'm happy to give anybody any suggestions on places to go, but I feel like most of you probably, if you're in Oregon or California, you are rich with opportunities and places to go and probably have your spots. Panhandle of Florida is basically like living in the outer reaches of Alaska, when it comes to good
It
quality
is.
liquor stores. Which, hey, also a business opportunity. If anyone wants to move to the Panhandle and join Tony.
Yeah.
All right. We're gonna let Jack go, but everyone hang out for just a second. I have some cool swag from Heaven Hill to hand out. What's it called? We got some. The ultimate giveaway is gonna be these. We got some nice Elijah Craig socks. A
Y'all be good. Have a great night. Happy
Okay,
holidays.
You too.
Jack.
have a good evening.
Thanks, Jack. Appreciate it, man.
So we got this. You saw the picture. I don't know if I posted it. I think I posted it. Julep strainer, mixing glass, a matching bar spoon. Essentially, you get a whole big kit of everything to go for you to make your next cocktail. Apron, bar spoon, whole thing. But we're gonna give that away last because we're also going to give away. Let's see. So I got a couple of pairs of those socks. So we'll run it 3 times and we'll give that away right now. I'm you to remember, and you're responsible for getting the stuff from me. That's it. That's
Does the
all.
apron come with an ironic mustache?
I mean, you have to grow it.
Do I still get to be in the drawing even though I pissed him off by saying this was overpriced?
Yes.
He left. You're good.
For sure, I did.
You're allowed to have your opinion. Let me get the names real quick. What the I think I pulled the names while I was out of town, so they'll be in this folder. Give me 3 seconds. Yeah, so we're gonna do three. We're gonna do the first one is going to be see, a julep strainer, and a mixing spoon. So we're gonna do that. Second one's gonna be a mixing spoon and some socks, and then the first place is gonna be the whole shebang bang. Let me paste everybody's names. Let me share the screen. You know what? I'm gonna stop recording and then we can do this, just so I'm not posting everybody's names on YouTube. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you at the next one.